how's everybody doing? Like, what kind of atmosphere did you feel when you walked in here? And did you think about, hey, I'm going to help create an atmosphere? And I just want to warn us, and myself too, that we have to be on the lookout for growing cold, for allowing our faith to slip into duty only. Do we believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be? Something amazing about Jesus is, you look at all the great leaders in human history, and then you also look at people who claim to be God. And Jesus is the only one that falls into both categories. And it's really quite amazing that Jesus claimed to be God, and I spent a lot of time and came this close to be able to walk us through all the claims that Jesus made, and perhaps we'll do that next week. But Jesus convinced people in his own lifetime that he was God and turned the world upside down in a way that you wouldn't expect. And, there are people, and I read up on some this week, that do claim to be God, but they convince a small number of people and it peters out. And even those who do convince people that they are God, they don't have great teaching that turns the world upside down. It is something amazing that Jesus is, because he is who he claimed to be. And I hope we're looking forward to that blessed hope when he is going to return, right? And we get to live in light of that. So, when I come in here, Gospel Life, in Sundays, I always, sadly, I always need to be refreshed. And, do I always feel like singing the songs? Every single time. No, but I know that when I engage in those, right, my spirit's going to follow. And it's like, we have to remember that we cannot allow our hearts to grow cold. We got to stoke that fire. And we come in here on Sundays. Jesus gave us the assembly for one of the reasons is to do that. We have to remember that the people on stage who are they're leading us in worship. It is not a performance. It is something that they are leading us into so we can all lift our praise up to the Lord. And you know what I get most encouraged about? Is when I hear people around me singing. And I know Cliff is the same way. When you hear the congregation lifting up their voices in praise, and when you come into a place where you're surrounded by people who are like-minded, who have the same beliefs, who have been affected supernaturally by God himself, and they're walking in that path, when you're surrounded by that, it is encouraging. Is it not? And what I'm excited about, because Cliff and I oftentimes will watch the recording of the worship, right? Trying to pursue excellence. And so we just bought 2 microphones so we can record the Christmas play, and we get to take those 2 microphones after the Christmas play is done, and we get to put them out in the congregation. So now when we watch the recording, we get to hear the congregational singing. Now, there is going to be some congregational singing, right? So maybe, and all of us have different gifts, right? And some of us are more gifted to sing, right? I'm not one of the people that is most gifted to sing. And I get encouraged by other people who are. And I feel like I have surrogate singers here, right? I sing proxy through them, right? Because I hear their beautiful voice, but my voice kind of resonates with that. But if it's just my voice, not so good. So maybe all these people who like to lift up their voice in song like a trumpet, we're going to assign you to sit next to people who need some encouragement with that, okay? All right? So it'll be great. So here we are. Can you believe it's December? We're finishing up 2016. How's that feel? Is it like, whew, can't wait for 2017? And if that's true, did that the way you felt about 2016? Yeah, it just jumps. And here we are, and next thing you know, we're going to be standing before the Lord, and I look forward to that. Jesus says, though he die, yet he will, those who die, if they believe in me, yet they will live. Do we believe that? Are we living in light of that death for us is not the end, it's the end of the beginning. And it's the beginning of our face-to-face time. Talk about real face time, right? With Jesus. I want you to be encouraged this morning. Because you know what? If anybody should have a Merry Christmas, it should be us. Right? Absolutely. So I want you to, it's time to start, thinking about doing an analysis of how was 2016 for you? There was some good, there was some bad, there was some ugly, there was different things, right? Was God working? Were we resisting? God has done some amazing things, and I am encouraged. Amen. But let's just take stock and say, hey, what would we want God to do in our lives in 2017? Serve the Lord, right? Are you ever going to regret that you served the Lord? Man, I served the Lord. Could have been serving self. Missed those TV episodes, right? Whatever it is. No. So it's like, and one of the questions we like to ask ourselves, and just by way of calibration, is, did you make any disciples? Did the Lord use you to make disciples in 2016? Because that's where it gets exciting. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about this morning. Is the idea is, you know what I want as a pastor of a church and see people? I just want, no matter where people are at in life, no matter how far away from the Lord, or how close to the Lord they are, I just want God's blessing on their lives. I really do. I just want to remove anything that is an obstacle to God's blessing in the person's life. I don't want to shame them. I don't want to guilt them. I want to see them experience God's presence in their life. And so everything we talk about when we talk about sin is, we're not trying to guilt and shame people. We're trying to remove things that are obstacles to God's presence being manifested in our life. And we have a text for that in 2 Timothy. That if a man, a servant of the Lord's, will cleanse himself from these, he will be a vessel meet for the master's use. Do you want to be a vessel meet for the master's use, whereby you are walking in his presence and being used by God as an instrument to manifest his presence out into the world? Do you have a love that's turned inward, or do you have a love that spills outward? Is the question we like to ask. So, hey, you say, you know what, Lord, I'm gonna ask you for something that's bigger than myself. I'm gonna ask you for something that's gonna require faith. Lord, I want you to do an amazing work in my life in 2017, and I want you to use me to do a work in other people's life in 2017. Who do you want me to focus on? Who do you want me to serve? Who do you want me to be a blessing to in 2017? Can we begin to ask the Lord and have those conversations with the Lord in prayer before the Lord? Because guess what? We have room to grow here. This side of the church building is more popular. And it needs to change. We'll get new chairs. That might change, guys. I don't know. That might change. We might not have a middle aisle. Who knows? I have a few announcements, by the way. Mike and Josie has that mission to the Philippines. Tomorrow, I am finally having the opportunity to go through all my closets, and because I was doing that just the other day looking for some warm clothes, and I realized I have a ton of clothes I can donate. I am never going to wear again, right? Times change. And so I want to encourage you. Josie could use all those. She needs to get those shipped out to the Philippines for those poor villages over there, and it's a blessing. So I know that I can fill up several trash bags. Rebecca, I know you can fill up way more than that, right, if you wanted to. But we need to get those out to Josie. If we can even have those at the church building next Sunday, just clean out our closets. Guess what? It makes room for more stuff. Right? We get to buy all new, no, I was kidding. We can clear out and just not have to live in clutter, right? And have organized closets and get to help people there. All right, we have a Christmas play coming up. I want you to use this as an opportunity to invite people to celebrate Jesus with us. All right? You know, you just think about it momentarily. You know, say you are living a secular life, right? And you don't believe in the supernatural and the physical, the tangible, biological. That's all there is in life, the material. What is Christmas like for you? You know, did you really feel like you got your Christmas on without being able to celebrate the birth of Jesus? And part of celebrating Christmas is being around other people in the community celebrating together. It's a big part of it. There's something special about that. You know, it's just when we come together and we gather and we worship and we celebrate the birth of Jesus, because we realize Jesus did not have to come to the planet. He could have left us alone, right? He didn't have to reveal himself to us. So let's let some of our celebrations spill out into the community and just think. You may be surprised who might come with you on Christmas because they need some Christmas spirit. Someone sent a video on Facebook about some Christians. They went into a shopping mall and just spontaneously, as the kids were going up to see Santa, they began singing Christmas carols, but he did it in a really neat way. And so they had all these people posted up in different places in the main gathering place of the mall, and then just one lady starts singing, and a few people more gather, and then a person up Going up the escalator, some guys start singing Come All You Faithful, and then another person way up on the balcony starts singing this other song, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And next thing you know, the whole mall and that gathering place is worshiping. And then I was like, it's got to stop. It's too much. It's too intense, right? They're worshiping in public. And what do next? They have a lady and a man and a little baby dressed up like Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus come into the middle of the shopping mall spontaneously, and they start singing that one song, that Christmas carol that talks about fall on your knees. You know what people started doing? They started falling on their knees. Wow. And isn't that just right? Do you guys feel that when you come into his presence and you really focus on all these? Do you have that natural desire just to fall down on your knees and worship? And just, it's like, glory to God that this physical world that I see with all the suffering and all the evil in the world and all the hurt and the pain is not all there is. And people need to see that blessed hope in us spill out into this holiday season. So we have an opportunity to do something like that with our Christmas play. And you might be surprised, all I'm saying is, you might be surprised if you invite people who might want to come with you just to celebrate Jesus. December 18th, 6 p.m., right here at GL, church building. All right. You guys with that? You want to do that? Because we're not an exclusive club, you know. No, we're not. So a couple more things. We have an opportunity. Kind of having a little family meeting right now. We had an opportunity. Jim and Amy Carlton, their children went to Edmondson, just down the street. That is the closest school. It's an elementary school, closest school to us in proximity to our church building. And they've always bragged about how awesome the people are over there. Anybody ever go to Edmondson or have kids that go to Edmondson? Yeah. Okay. So. Jim and Amy set it up. We had a meeting with the principal. I've been reaching out to several principals around here, and this meeting was special. And so she says, hey, the good fellows take care, and Jim, I know Jim said this last week, I'll say it again now. The good fellows get together and do great work, and they collect Christmas gifts, clothing, such, for all the kids in Madison Heights. But see, the one condition they have is you have to be from Madison Heights. And because we have schools of choice around here, they're not able to, they have to draw the line somewhere apparently. And so we have the opportunity, Principal Mrs. Stevens said, hey, can you guys at your church take on 4 families for us? And these are families that are just outside of Madison Heights, like Hazel Park. And, you've got parents who they have to make a choice between paying the light bill, putting food on the table, or giving their kids Christmas gifts. You know how heartbreaking it is for a parent when they really are struggling. And it's an opportunity for us to come alongside of them. And it's also an opportunity for us to build relationships with people in our community. And James chapter 2, 14 through 17 tells us, you say you have faith, you do well, but, how can you say you have faith if you don't have works, is what he's saying. Right? So, really, we can really tell what we believe by our actions. Talk is cheap oftentimes, isn't it? So, it's an opportunity, and the early church fathers, you know what they taught about the idea of giving to the poor? The early church fathers taught this. If you withhold your resources from the poor, you are a thief. Take that in for a second. That hit me kind of hard. He says that they thought, if you withhold your resources from the poor and from the needy, you are a thief. You are stealing. Now, we don't often think about it that way in American society and culture and in the church here, do we? But it's like, I love that. That's that strong challenge there. So, hey, we have been taking up offerings in our community groups, and we're going to do this primarily through our community groups. The money's already available. And if you are not part of a community group and you want to be a part of it, you can, write on the envelope, drop it in the box back there, or drop it in the offering plate. You can be a part of this. But I don't want to just barely meet the requirement. I want to go above and beyond for these families. All right? So it's an opportunity. It's such a wonderful thing because we're going from the Christmas project that we did in Detroit to the Christmas mission we're doing in closer proximity to the community we're seeking to reach. All right? And again, one of the reasons why we want to do that as a church is because why? We want God's blessing on our church. We want to do the things that Jesus has called us to do. So it's an opportunity. And one of the things I love about our church is you guys, you're generous people. And you always go above and beyond, and I always appreciate that about you. So encouraging. So we need to have all that stuff collected, and there's several different ways we can do it. Amy Carlton's going to kind of head up the shopping. If your group needs help with the shopping, I already sent the list to the community group leaders, but Amy is definitely ready and willing to go do the shopping for you, so that's very helpful. If you have any questions about that, you can see me, but we need to have all those items collected and delivered to Edmondson by the 20th of December, because that's their last day of school. Okay, 20th of December, so that's coming up quick. We got time, though. Finally, by the way, if you're new or you're a guest, we don't do this many announcements all the time. We're just kind of having a family meeting right now. But we're going to get to this, our teaching in just a moment. What has happened as the side wing has just opened up 2 weeks ago, and even last week while I was gone, there was a couple young men that were trying to make the church more holy. Did you guys hear about that? That was hilarious. They did make the church more holy. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, you can take a tour over there. You'll see what I'm talking about. But it's an opportunity, and we've been doing the children's church one way, and we need to relaunch it. And a few of the people have been doing a lot of the work over there. And because children are important to Jesus, they're important to us, right? So the idea is I have a schedule written out, and some of you I will be approaching. But the idea is that when you serve in the children's church or the nursery, I really would like it to be they only have to serve once every 2 months, so that we all collectively shoulder the burden of that, take on that responsibility and that opportunity. So I'd like to have a quick children's church relaunch meeting, and I may be reaching out to you this week to invite you. Anybody who's is interested can come, but next Sunday after church, we're just going to do a quick run through on children's church, because especially for our teachers and people helping out of there, I need to walk you through the technology, through some of the tools and resources we have over there that you may not be aware of, so you can use that in the best possible way. So children's church meeting next week after service. It'll be quick, short and sweet, and I really appreciate your help on that. Okay. You guys can be gracious with me. I really was laboring, and I got really close to delivering one message that may have actually been, in fact, like 3 messages. But then at the last moment, I really decided that needs to wait for the few weeks. I have more work to do there. So instead, what I would like to do this morning is do a follow-up on what we've been talking about as far as costly mercy, and just give you something this morning real practical that you can put into practice. So, and I'm going to tell you what that is in just a moment, but I read a story at our community group last Wednesday, and I meant to share it with the whole church. So I know those in my community group, you've already heard this, but I want to read it to you again. So, we've been talking about the idea of costly mercy, and there's all different kinds of expression of costly mercy in the Christian life as modeled for us by Jesus. And forgiving people and being reconciled with people is just one form of the costly mercy that Jesus has called us to. And what happens is, and there's another story I wanted to share with you about an internment camp in China, whereby even the missionaries and the priests that were stuck in this internment camp in the 20th century, they would use very elaborate justifications for hoarding food and not sharing with other people in the internment camp, concentration camp. And the same thing can be true. We're not in a concentration camp situation, are we? But we can use very elaborate schemes and justifications and rationales to not have to be reconciled with people, to not really have to ask forgiveness, to really kind of keep them at arm's length. And we have to ask ourselves, is that really what represents Jesus well? And secondly, what kind of power do you want demonstrated in your life with reference to people? Because being reconciled with a person, whether they sinned against you or you sinned against them, is one of those places where you want to protect, right? You want to shut down and isolate and hold the person at arm's length. And you know why? I want to direct your attention to one reason why that is. Because it's an opportunity for the power of the Holy Spirit to be manifest in your life. because it's oftentimes something greater than yourself. You've been hurt by a person. You have oftentimes legitimate reason to be on guard against that person. They've let you down time and time again. And one of the ways I like to say it is, God will put certain people in your life so that you can learn what it means to forgive 70 times 7. And you can't just look at the person. You have to think about, hey, I get to learn and experience the fellowship of his suffering to learn what it means to forgive 70 times 7. Have any of us come close to actual 70 times 7 with one person? But by that second or third time, we're like, we have all kinds of reasons why it makes sense where we can just not have to go through the process of forgiving. And I ask you this morning, what kind of power do you want? What kind of presence of the Holy Spirit do you want in your life? Is it really actually about the other person, or is it about your relationship with God? And see, that's one of those instances where you can experience the fact that you are not bound. You don't have to be bound by the people in your life. Because your relationship with God will allow you to transcend the circumstances in your life. So you can be above them because you're getting all your needs met from Him, and you are not a needy person that turns your expectations of people into conditions and that you conditions from people whereby that determines how you treat them, and thereby enter into conditional love with people. It's so easy for us to slip into conditional love with people, and it makes sense. You can make a good logical argument why, hey, it's wise of you, it's smart of you, it's maybe even, you might say it's biblical or spiritual of you to keep this person, to not be reconciled with person because of X, Y, or Z. So I want to read you this story about Corrie ten Boom, and I'll just get to it. It was a church in Munich that I saw him. And I need to remind you, Munich was the beginning and headquarters of the Nazi Party. When Hitler moved to Munich, he began meeting with what would become the Nazi Party, and we recall that just outside of Munich was the first concentration camp at Dachau, however you pronounce it. So it was at a church in Munich, of all places, that I saw him, Corey writes. A balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door at the rear. It was 1947. And I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. And we recall, of course, that 1947, World War II has just ended. It was the truth they needed most to hear in that bitter, bombed-out land, and I gave them my favorite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from Hollander's mind, I like to think that that's where forgiven sins were thrown. When we confess our sins, I said, God cast them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. Now, it's real easy for us to say that, right? The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence, in silence collected their wraps, in silence left the room. Can you imagine preaching forgiveness post-World War II in Nazi Germany, post-Nazi Germany? Do you think that's going to be a message that goes over well? Did God suspend His desire that we forgive people even in a horrendous situation like post-World War II Germany? It was like, you know what, they've really hurt you, right? They tried to commit genocide on several different people groups. I understand if you can't forgive them. Would that be God's conclusion in His group? And we say, hey, God is just being gracious to me and allowing me not to have to forgive or not to have to pursue reconciliation. Could we really ask someone who was stuck in a concentration camp, do we really expect them to be reconciled with their captors? Is that an unreasonable expectation? It's a good question, right? What do we... I don't seek to minimize that at all. But can you see how that request to be reconciled to your captor from a concentration camp would require something supernatural from you? Absolutely. So people stood up in silence after giving this talk. And that's when I saw him working his way forward against the others. One moment, I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next, a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. So she's having flashbacks. It came back with the rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fraulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take that hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crop swinging from his belt. I was face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fraulein. Can you imagine? That's great, God forgave you. Don't you dare expect me to, right? I mean, that's kind of bold, right? And we might be thinking to ourselves, if someone approached us like that and be in that situation, if you really were forgiven, asked God forgiveness, and you had really become a Christian, you wouldn't be demanding me to forgive you right here in this moment. But then you remember, wow, I've just spoken on the idea of forgiving. It's true for everyone else. Is it true for me? Will you forgive me? And I stood there, I whose sins had again and again to be forgiven and could not forgive. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I ever had to do. For I had to do it, I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. I knew it not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies, hear this, those who were able to forgive their former enemies were able also to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And we have the idea of bitterness, and we talked about this weeks ago, the idea that bitterness in our lives can lead to mental illness, so that the spiritual manifests itself in the physical, because those two are inextricably linked. Still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart, but forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Help, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so, woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. And for a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. Is that an experience you'd like to have? Is that a way that you would like to live? And do you see how our bitterness and our refusing to forgive even those that have sinned against us greatly, can get in the way. And what's beautiful about the story, and what we can take away from the story, is that God puts us in these situations where it's going to require some supernatural love given to us so that we can give to someone else. But what's the good part about that? Yeah, we have to overcome the bitterness because we have all these reasons why they don't deserve it. And it's true, people don't deserve forgiveness, right? It creates a debt that we have to absorb. But that's what mercy is. It's not justice. Mercy doesn't exist if all we want is justice. But it puts us in a place where people, not only can we, but other people can experience something supernatural. The supernatural love of God. And so if we start out with that horizontal view we've been talking about, and we just focus on that other person, we have all kinds of reasons why we shouldn't have to be reconciled to them. But we don't start out there, do we? Of course, we do start out there. But we then have to learn in our maturity to direct our eyes to Him. Because dare I say, to the degree that that soldier sinned against this woman, Corrie ten Boom, we have sinned against God more. And you say, how can that be? Because of God's holiness. Because of God's holiness. You know, our standards are infinitely smaller and lower than God's standards because we haven't fully comprehended His holiness. His holiness is such that it required Him to send His only Son to die on the cross for us. That's an expression of His holiness and of His righteousness and of His justice. And we see the genius, again, I always love to say this, the genius of the gospel on the cross is that justice and mercy had found the same expression through God's only Son. Justice and mercy collided, or as some people say, justice and mercy kissed. How is that hitting you right now? I'm wondering. It's easy to talk about and it's easy to hear about to some degree when other people have had to learn and experience this. But I say, what kind of church? I can back up and say, what kind of church do we want to be? Because a church is a collection of the individual Christians within the church. And we have to ask ourselves, what level of Christianity are we going to be satisfied with? Because what Jesus calls us into is hardcore. Right? Just want to challenge. Do you feel challenged a little bit on that? Can you just put this in your memory bank? Because a time will come when you are going to, if you're not already, even this last week or even today, if you're not struggling to love someone and be able to forgive them, that time will come. Mark it down. Am I right? And I don't want you to see that as so much as a burden and a trial, but so much as an opportunity to experience and demonstrate the love of God. So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about, in some sense, the idea of us forgiving others. I want to give you something practical this morning. So I want to give you 7 things you might want to jot down. I want to switch gears and turn it the other way. What about us seeking forgiveness from others? Us seeking forgiveness from others. And this is definitely something I'm preaching to myself. So I want us to talk about, just real briefly, and we'll be done, and we'll celebrate the Lord's Supper, take communion together. I want us to talk about the quality and the caliber of our seeking reconciliation from someone else when we ourselves have sinned. And again, this is something I need to hear with reference to my marriage, because what I've learned, if anything, in my marriage is my wife is not satisfied or content or believe in it when I just say something like, sorry. Are you? Now, I can say, if I've sinned against my wife, and believe me, that does happen, right, Rebecca? If I've sinned against my wife, I can go to her and say, and she's like, I want to get this right. Sorry. And then I can follow that up with something like, oh, you're not satisfied with that? You just want your pound of flesh. You guys have little ways to try to, say you're sorry without saying you're sorry? We all have our little strategies, don't we? It's like, maybe it comes at a time where I'm on mission. I got something I got to get done. Oh, my wife saw, she's, sorry, Becca, okay, we good? All right, good. Back to work. Back to my mission. Back to what I'm doing. I just need you to be okay so I can get, is that selfless or selfish? It's like, you're getting in the way of my life, Rebecca. I'm sorry you're hurt. It's really annoying, actually. It's not a good time for me. Right? So I want to ask us this morning, how do we confess? What does that look like? How about this one? I'm sorry if I hurt you. You're like, I'm jotting that one down. That's a good one, right? I'm sorry if I hurt you. Hey, I'm sorry you feel that way. I am so sorry you feel that way. You know, Rebecca and I in college, we worked at a call center for UPS, United Parcel Service. And so, you know, we were the people on the other end of the line when you called to track your package, or more importantly, probably, when your package was missing. And so come around Christmas time, Thanksgiving, you know, certain packages that were really important to people came up missing. And it's like trying to find a needle in a stack of needles, right? Because one package amidst millions of packages, and, you know, sometimes it would be something important like, hey, I got a wedding coming up, and the engagement ring is lost, or the wedding dress is lost, right? And you know what? They are taking it out on you personally, like you lost their package. And what we learned at that call center was, as we looked around at how other people were dealing with this onslaught of attack, because they can get real vicious, right? And some people, the way they handled it was, make the person feel like dirt, because that will help me get my package. Now, do you want to help a person get their package if they're making you feel like dirt? Is that the person you want to go the extra mile for, so that on your breaks you're making calls above and beyond to certain call centers like the main hub in Louisville? Or is that the person you want to like just accidentally hang up on? Oh, I'm so sorry. Right? I'm going to hang up on them in the middle of a sentence. That way they'll think it get disconnected. But what we learned, we started hearing people around us, other people working in the call center, was, I am sorry you feel that way. And it's like, wow, that's a good one. Right? Because you're feeling hurt, you're feeling put down, and it's like, is that a real sorry? Is that a real apology? Because the idea is we were representatives for this package, and the fact of the matter is, no matter how they're treating us, the package was lost. And so maybe they're not handling it in the best possible way, and they're attacking me personally, but what I learned is, when you make a statement like that, the next thing you're probably going to hear is, may I talk to your supervisor? It didn't go over well. And Rebecca and I both got to the place where we were the supervisors. And so if an agent has made that statement, and then we had to follow up with that, it just like super escalated call, right? And we called it de-escalating the call. So do you have those little statements in your own life, and then do you wonder why your reconciliation is not going well? So can we make a decision this morning that we're just going to abandon all statements like that? So I'm just going to run you through a few things to consider. I usually have a 3-step process, actually 4-step process, but I want to add a few more things to it so that we can actually have a substantive quality, spiritual quality to our asking forgiveness from others when we confess our sin. And by the way, there is a freedom that comes when you just lay yourself bare. You guys believe that? When you're admitting that you're wrong, hey, and that you're clinging to Jesus, not only for forgiveness, but for acceptance. Do you ever think, well, I have to lie to my wife in order to protect her? Right? I mean, that's just one example I can think of. It's because I want to protect her, right? So and then you get caught in a lie, and then you say, hey, I was only trying to protect you. But what you learn is, hey, your wives, what they value more than what you did is the honesty. Honesty is infinitely more important to your wife, to a woman, than you're trying to protect her in some shady way. And so what can happen is, in a situation like that, you want to confess. It's like, but then you're bringing up all the justifications of why you did it. Hey, I was only trying to help you. I lied to help you. Don't you appreciate that? I was only looking out for your best interest. And what does that quickly turn into? That turns into justification, doesn't it? So the first thing I want you to see is, switching gears a little bit, I'm going to run through this somewhat quickly. When we sin, we need to get that right, we need to address everyone involved. What's the opposite of that? Say a silent prayer to the Lord, and I'm forgiven. Right? Does that work? If you just say, hey, you know what, I sinned, I'm going to pray a silent prayer to the Lord, are you reconciled with the people in your life? Doesn't bring about reconciliation. So you need to address everyone involved. So confession should reach as far as the offense. You know, the first person you should confess to is the Lord. And I want you to get in the habit of that. Is it's not just seeking confession from the person. And I say, just don't say a silent prayer to the Lord. Don't not say a prayer to the Lord either. And we got to get away from the idea that I'm sinning against people. Ultimately, the ultimate offense is against God because He is the Creator. He has all authority. So any sin is a sin against Him ultimately. So, and when we get in the habit of confessing our sin to Him first, that gives us the opportunity to get in the right spirit so that we can approach the other person spiritually. See, that process already starts us off with a vertical view so that we can get it right horizontally. When we read this in Psalm 32:5, when we read, "Finally I confessed all my sins to you and stopped trying to hide my guilt. I said to myself, I will confess my rebellion to the Lord, and you forgave me. All my guilt is gone." Are we living a life that's guilt-free? Or are we carrying the guilt around with us? You say, I don't want to have to face it. I'd rather hide it. But guess what? What is the consequence? One of the consequences for us as Christians is we walk around with this guilt and this burden heavy on us. And Jesus doesn't want us to do that. But seeking reconciliation with God and with the person is the way that we can take that guilt and not have to walk and live around in guilt. And that's really a lot about what the Celebrate Recovery process is about, is removing guilt from people's lives by helping them to make amends with people. So we don't have to walk around as Christians with no joy, burdened down by broken relationships. There's something, sometimes you can't force the other person to forgive you, but guess what? Knowing that you've done everything you can do, you can rest, can't you? So it's like, sometimes, and I say this to my wife, it's like, hey, guess what, Rebecca? Just do the right thing and let the chips fall where they may. Just do the right thing, and hey, if it doesn't turn out well, doesn't matter. You've done right before the Lord. You've done what you can do, and now it's in God's hands. And you can rest in that. But you want to address everyone involved. So, sin should be confessed to all those who have been affected by those sins. By the way, that's good motivation to not sin, isn't it? Because consequences for our actions is actually God's grace in our life. Red flags to say, hey, don't do that anymore. So we get to learn a lesson. Secondly, as we've already said, now, so the first one is address everyone involved. Second one is avoid if, but, or maybe. Avoid conditional clauses. So we ruin our confessions when we shift the blame on others or on circumstances. So, again, I'm asking you to write down avoid if, but, or maybe, not to write down how to do a fake confession, right? So do you guys ever, again, more ways we can ruin our confessions. I'm sorry if I've done something to upset you. I shouldn't have lost my temper, but I was tired. Is that a good confession? I was tired. My tiredness made me do it. I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings, but you really upset me. What is this? This is a token apology. It's going through the motions. So if you don't take the time to think about what you've done wrong, how does that person know that your behavior is going to change in the future? How does anything change? So It's about, hey, if I sin against, I need to really stop and slow down. I need to understand the person. I'm going to say that in a moment. So the third thing I want us to learn is we need to learn to admit specifically. Specifically. Is that a hard one? Hey, I'm sorry for what? What are you sorry for? I don't know, I'm just sorry. My wife can get me on this one sometimes, right? She says, what are you sorry for? I'm like, ugh. Then I have to actually, when she asks me that question, I actually have to stop and think. Okay, she's not letting this one go. I have to actually think about it. And it's like, what are you sorry for? So you want to admit specifically. Does that, when you admit specific thing you've done, does that show the person that you're serious? Is it hard for those words to flow? So here's the second thing about that. When we admit specifically, guess what? We don't just identify or admit our wrong actions. You know what else we got to identify and admit? Our wrong attitudes. Our wrong attitudes. Not just the action, it's the attitude behind the action that we should confess. So what are some examples of this? Bitterness, ingratitude, envy, jealousy, resentment, self-righteousness, disloyalty, insensitivity, stubbornness. We could go on, right? So oftentimes it's the attitude that's worse than the action. Because you had a terrible attitude and maybe you allowed a little bit of that to slip towards the wrong action towards a person. But how about if we get all the way with our apology, with asking forgiveness and say, hey, I had a really bad attitude with this. I was really bitter against you, or I was really acting stubborn, or I was, I was getting up on my soapbox, my high horse, and I was just acting in a self-righteous way, acting like I'm better than you, and whatever it might be. Wouldn't that really add some validity to our asking forgiveness when we get into the heart attitude of it? And that's really what we should be looking for in our own lives before the Lord. And further, how about this? We get to the place where in our asking forgiveness, we confess how we've sinned against God. So for me, with my wife, this looks like this. I realize I failed to be the kind of husband God wants me to be. I realize in this particular action, specific action, and attitude, I have really failed you, Rebecca, to be the husband. I failed you and I failed the Lord to be the kind of husband God is calling me to be. You know what kind of security that brings to my wife when I confess it that way? Because she really, all my wife really wants from me is to be a spiritual man. Because the primary thing my wife needs from me is security and stability. And when she knows I'm a spiritual man, do you realize how much stability and security that brings to our marriage and to her life? So when I show her I have a God focus, it brings reconciliation to our marriage. Fourthly, we acknowledge the hurt. We acknowledge the hurt. So we might say something like, you must have been terribly hurt and embarrassed when I said those things to you in front of everyone. What does that do? When we acknowledge the hurt, you're communicating, hey, I've thought about how I've sinned against you. I've put myself in your shoes. And I'm feeling the full weight of that. I'm trying to feel the weight of that. And you must have felt this way and this way. Does that communicate the sincerity of your asking forgiveness? Moving on. How about this one? We accept the consequences. Fifthly, we accept the consequences. The idea is, hey, I said I'm sorry, and then the idea of the consequences come up, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought you forgave me. Or, didn't I say I was sorry? Why should I have to, whatever the consequences might be? When, and the illustration I always give is, if two cars get in a car accident, and the person who's responsible goes to the other person who's not responsible and says, hey, I'm sorry I hit your car, is the car suddenly fixed? And if you say, I'm sorry I hit your car, but then you're not forthcoming with your insurance information, and you're not willing to, do anything to rectify the situation, are you truly sorry? So the idea is, hey, forgiveness cannot be a means whereby we get out of consequences, because a truly repentant person is willing to embrace the consequences. Embrace the consequences. So, can we accept, part of the consequences oftentimes when you sin against another person is what? It's realizing trust has been broken. And one of the ways we seek to get around the consequences is we immediately expect that trust to be restored. But that consequence of sinning against a person sometimes is it takes time to develop that trust. Should we allow that person time for that trust to be rebuilt? Or should we demand it of them instantaneously because we said some incantation or magic formula with our words? Should we allow the person? We need to be willing to confess to all the, say, for instance, you gossip about a person, that's dangerous because guess what? Now you got to be willing to go back to all those different people because that's part of the consequences, right? Well, I asked forgiveness from this person, but all those other people still might believe in a lie because we shared gossip, right? So part of the consequences in that situation is, hey, I'm willing to go back to all those people and admit I was wrong. And don't you think, as I said before, that's going to be good encouragement to not engage in that behavior again? Sixth, we actually change our behavior. One of the ways we communicate to the other person that we're truly sorry is we tell them, here's what I'm going to do differently in the future. Here's how I'm going to change my behavior. This is what I'm going to do next time that happens. And you may need to ask them, hey, what should I be doing next time this happens? Well, how would you like me to respond? How can I not hurt you the next time? And all these are expressions of love. Seventh and finally, we ask the other person forgiveness and then we allow them time to forgive. Because if my wife, like I said before, if I ask her to forgive me and I genuinely mean it and she just wants to talk about it for an hour, I can get really impatient. Didn't I ask you to forgive me? Aren't you a Christian? Don't you know that Jesus is only going to forgive you the way that you forgive me right now? So can you hurry up? Is that true repentance? You're thinking I'm a horrible person right now. Wow, maybe I've said too much. Looking at me like I'm a sinner or something, or crazy. Wow, I'm really embarrassed right now. But it's true, we all have these inclinations in our heart and the way we seek reconciliation or ask forgiveness from people is certainly a good litmus test of where we're at with the Lord. It's a way to love people, isn't it? So I'm just saying, let's not be satisfied. I just don't want us to be the kind of church where we're like our reconciliation with people is as shallow, as surface as we'd find any other place. People need to know that we take these things seriously. So I'll just run through them really quickly once more. We address everyone involved. We avoid conditional clauses like if, but, or maybe. We admit specifics, actions, and attitudes. Fourthly, we acknowledge the hurt and we're willing to listen to the hurt, how we've hurt the person. Fifth, we accept the consequences. Sixth, we explain how we're going to change our behavior or ask how we can change our behavior in the future. And seventh, we give the person time for them to forgive us. And in the meantime, we seek to rebuild that trust. Chances are you're going to have opportunity to practice this week. So you guys ready? Motivation is we want God's blessing in our life, isn't it? We want God's blessing. I don't want us carrying around the guilt and the shame. I don't want us living. You know what? And here's the thing we like to do. It's going to be easier to ask forgiveness tomorrow. It's going to be easier to seek reconciliation next week. But that week can turn into a month, and that month can turn into 6 months, right? And then we can kind of forget about it. And then what happens is we have bricks built up as a wall in the doorway of communication with people. And if I can encourage you further, I often say this: people will love you and respect you more for your mistakes than your successes. And this is a hard one. When I say that, what I mean is they'll love you more for your mistakes, that you actually go and get right with them, because that's something they rarely see. That demonstrates that, hey, we're taking our faith seriously. There's way too much hypocrisy demonstrated in the nominal church in America and other places. And we want to show people, hey, we definitely take our faith seriously. It's not just about surface, shallow, self-righteous religion. People need to know that we're the real deal because the Holy Spirit is working in us for real. So it's an opportunity. So we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper this morning. And I want to invite every Christian brother and sister, if you're following Jesus and you've experienced his forgiveness, I want to invite you to celebrate with us. And I would like to have just a moment of introspection, just to listen to the Holy Spirit, see what he would have for us. What does he want to tell us this morning? So Ben, if you would just play us a song. I'm going to be asking for a few volunteers in a moment. But before we come and gather the elements, the bread and the wine, I would like to say, just be listening. Just be listening. You say, maybe my heart is growing cold and my faith has become just a duty or just routine, or I'm distracted with all these other things. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's like, hey, I have unconfessed sin in my life. Maybe in some of the people close to me in my life, I'm already allowing distance to come in. Maybe I've not truly given myself over to the Lord, and I'm really, I want God's blessing in my life, but I'm really afraid of what that might require, the drastic changes he might require of me if I really gave everything over to the Lord. I want you to encourage you this morning, the Lord wants to bless you. He really wants to bless you. And what a joy just to know that you have God's blessing in your life. So whatever it might be, just take a moment, Ben, moment of introspection. And if the Spirit convicts you of anything, I just want us to confess it and then follow through with that confession if anybody else is involved later on, as soon as possible.